Greetings, everybody. Hey, this is a presentation that I try to include in most of the classes that I teach in the Master of Public Administration program. And it was time to update it. So this is a February 2024 edition. And I thought it was important to update it now because 2024 is a presidential election year. And of course, if you pay attention at all, and I would say if you're awake, you know that it's a presidential election year, right? We're really because of the hyper media environment in which we live. It's not just newspapers, it's not just broadcast media, it's online media, it's social media. We are truly saturated with media outreach, right? And so we know, of course, that it's a presidential election year because candidates for various offices are constantly looking for ways to get their message to us, right? And so some people get to the point of saying, I am so tired of this, right? And they really do. Just my personal anecdote is I'm a person who watches Jeopardy. I know not everybody watches Jeopardy. I happen to like Jeopardy, but Jeopardy turns out to be a great time for candidates to air commercials because the demographic they want to reach happens to watch Jeopardy. So we know it's out there, right? But here's the question I want to ask. Why do we care about voting? That's one question. And the other question is, do we care about voting? Maybe I should have reversed those, but those two questions in tandem. Do we care about voting? And why do we care about voting? That's what I'd like to talk about in this brief presentation. So this data, and I'm going to give you a few slides here in this presentation. This one happens to come from the United States Census. And so you can see at the bottom of this chart, I have the source there. It is the United States Census. The U.S. Census actually does a lot more than the every 10-year census. They do a lot of other surveys. I would really encourage you to look at, if you haven't looked at the census site, it's really a great source for data, for all kinds of data, because they have other surveys, like they have the American Community Survey. They have many other survey programs that they administer. And in fact, if you want to know about their survey programs, once a year, our Center for Public Affairs Research here, which is part of CPACS, does an annual data users conference in August. If you could get your agency to pay for your attendance, it would be really worth your while, because they talk about using census data in that conference. But this happens to be national voting turnout for November 2020. So we know November 2020 was an election year. So this is interesting to me because we like to ask about demographics of voting, and this one happens to talk about age demographics. So I would tell you, if you copied and pasted that link, you would find that other demographics are covered in this page here that this references. But let's look at this for a second. So there's several columns here, and these are all of interest. So the first one highlighted in yellow talks about the total population of the United States 18 years of age and older. So 18 years is a key age because the basic minimum age to vote in the United States is 18 years old. So this first column gives you the total population for each of those age demographics. Now, those numbers, all the numbers on here are in thousands. So where it says, for example, for the 18 to 24 year age demographic, that's actually not 28,659, it's 28,659,000. For the 25 to 34, it's 44,871,000. Go all the way down to 75 years and older, 22,320,000. So add 3 zeros to each of the numbers across this entire chart. Okay, so the first thing is these age cohorts. These age cohorts are important. They turn out to be important for people, campaigns, I would say, who want to get out the vote, GOTV, get out the vote, because they actually key in by age demographics. So that's important. So that's our total population in the United States. And then the green column next to it is total citizen population. So we know in the United States that not everyone who resides in the United States is a citizen. Actually, the United States is not at all unusual in that regard, because most countries you can think of, has some percentage of the population that is, quote, a citizen. However, that country defines citizenship. And some X percentage of the population is non-citizen residents of the country, right? So in our country, only citizens can vote. But that column's in there just to sort of demonstrate our total population versus the citizen population. Okay, so only citizens can vote. So of that number, of that citizen population, there's two things this chart handles. One is whether they're registered to vote. That is, have they taken the action to say, yes, I want to vote, and signed a card that says I live at this address and registered to vote. So once you register your address, then the state is going to say, yes, you live in this precinct, and this is your polling place. But what percent of citizens actually report registered? So recognize that this comes from survey data. I think it comes from the American Community Survey that the census does. What percentage of people actually register? So that second block of yellow columns. This is a little bit shocking. So look at the 18 to 24 year age cohort. It says 59.8% are registered. That means 59.8% of that total citizen population, 26,737,000, actually bothered to register to vote. Now, look at the age cohorts as we increase in age, right? So 18 to 24, 25 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and so on. What we see is that the older age cohorts, beginning with about 45 years of age, a higher percentage of those persons are actually registered to vote. So we know that, for example, look at the second to the last row, in the 65 to 74-year-old age cohort, almost 80%, 79.1% of that total population of citizens has affirmatively registered to vote. So that's, higher, but still, we hear often that the older age cohorts are really the ones that vote more. But is 80% registered, is that impressive, right? How impressive is that? You can ask that question, right? But the interesting thing is that, there's this percentage of the population that doesn't even bother to register to vote, let alone vote. So now skip over a few columns because the data is a little bit redundant and mirror image, but go all the way to this third yellow column. So the fourth column I have highlighted, this one in yellow. From this data that the census gathered, what percentage of these age cohorts actually voted, right? So look at the first age cohort, the 18 to 24 year cohort, right? 13,752,000 persons voted, and this is just in November 2020. So 13,752,000 persons voted in that election of a total population of 26,737,000. So 51% voted. So if you go down again by age cohorts, by these 7 or 8 age cohorts, even when we get to the older age cohorts, say the 65 to 74-year-old cohort, it gets a little more impressive. So 76% of those persons, so 24 million, just over 24 million of those persons, of a total population of almost 32 million, or about 76% actually voted in that 2020 election. So for this 2020 election, which is not unusual, it is factual that older persons vote at higher turnout rates than younger persons. And so it's kind of amazing that in the 2020 election, of the people that could vote, 18 to 24-year-olds, only half of them voted. Half of them, right? But now I said, every country has citizens and non-citizen residents. If we go to this very last thing, we can see the percentage of people that voted. So in 2020, we voted for president, right? The highest percentage of all those cohorts was 73%, meaning about, that's the percentage of persons in the United States that voted for president of the United States. So this chart, this table, really it talks to two issues. One is just the act of registering in the first place, and the second is actually voting. So let's move on with this a little bit. Okay, so these two are from Pew Research. The one on the left is from a 2017 article. That's the second link, actually. The one on the right is from some research in 2023, I think. So what is this one talking about? Remember I talked about voter registration and the idea that, some people don't even bother to register to vote. So they couldn't vote if they wanted to. I mean, they didn't register, and then if they decide at the last second, oh gosh, I'm going to vote, well, they can't because they didn't register in time. So why don't they even register? So that's that figure 3 on the left. The unregistered have different reasons for not voting. So this chart, this kind of horizontal bar chart, compares two populations of persons. One is the unregistered. That's those people that don't even bother to register to vote. The other is the registered who might not vote, right? So the question that Pew was asking was, why don't you vote, right? So look at these reasons. I dislike politics. Voting doesn't have anything to do with real decisions. My one vote isn't going to affect anything. I don't see a difference between candidates. I don't, I'm too busy to vote. I don't like any of the candidates on the ballot. So you can look at this, and I also encourage you to look at the link. There's more data in the article, but really, people have all kinds of reasons to say not voting. The lead reason is I dislike politics. That varies a little bit when you get towards the bottom of this chart, and with the people who are actually registered but didn't bother to vote in a particular election, they'll say things like, I don't like any of the candidates, or I'm not informed enough. I mean, at least they're admitting they're not informed enough. Okay, so the right-hand figure talks about, this article was 2023, so it talks about 3 elections, 2018, 2020, and 2022. So the difference in those elections is 2018 was a congressional year, 2020 is a presidential election year, 2022 is back to a congressional year. This one contrasts the two major parties. We do have more than 2 parties in the United States, but we have 2 major parties, and contrast their voter turnout. So the figure talks about the share of citizens 18 years of age or older who in 2018, who voted in 2018, 20, and 2022, right? So it turns out that Republicans vote a little more consistently than Democrats in a lot of elections. But the figures, it's hard to say whether they're that significant. But in both cases, in both parties, we know that, again, voting is not necessarily, um, what they're doing. And again, I would go to this first link on this article, and you can probably get a lot more information on this. Okay, this is something that I personally have been tracking for quite a while. I have been gathering data from the Nebraska Secretary of State office. In most states, the Secretary of State is the top election official. This goes all the way back to the 2000 primary and runs through the 2022 general election. Okay, so at the bottom, the bottom axis has the legend there. So, like for example, it says 00P. That's the 2000 primary. 00G is the 2000 general. So it goes all the way across. So there's a primary election and a general election each of those years. So again, the difference is we vote for president in every 4 years. So 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, 16, 20. We will vote again this year. In the other years, the by-elections, we elect members of the House of Representatives, essentially, and some other offices. So here's what this is: a 2-axis chart. The one on the left shows the number of voters, and that corresponds to the red and blue bars. And the one on the right talks about voter turnout. So how many Nebraskans are registered to vote? So you can see that in the year 2000, in the primary, there were just over 1 million persons registered to vote. Again, in the general, just over 1 million persons registered to vote. But of those, how many voted? That's the red bar. So less than 400,000 in the primary. About 700,000 in the general. You can go across the chart and see that the blue bars are always taller than the red bars. What does that mean? That means we have a lot more people registered than actually vote. And then that little dotted line corresponds to the vertical or to the axis at the right. That's the turnout percent. We typically, for general elections, get around 70% voter turnout. So you can see that in, the year 2000, it almost got to 70%, but for 04, 08, 12, 16, it exceeded 70% a little bit. 20, it exceeded 70% by a lot, got close to 80%. I think it was about 78%, which is an improvement. But still, as controversial as the 2020 election was, still only about 78% of the registered voters actually bothered to vote. But contrast those presidential election years with the years where we're voting for the House of Representatives. So the most recent one, 22, in the only about, not even approaching 60% of the person's registered voters voted. And so that 60% line really seems to be the bar to try to overcome. But for a lot of those off-year elections, it only reaches about 45 or 50% of the registered voters who are actually voting. So it's interesting. By law now in Nebraska, we have voter ID. You have to show an ID card to vote. So it's interesting that even without voter ID, we got these percentages of voter turnout. So another interesting phenomenon that we know has come up in the past few years is some way of voting remote, right? Either by mail or early voting. That's been on the increase in Nebraska. So we know that in 2020, close to 80% of the people that did vote voted by some remote means. It's dropped off some since then, right? But not considerably, because before that, fewer people were voting by remote means. And so this is something that is interesting to discuss. How do we vote? How should we vote in terms of the technology of voting? Okay, this one is interesting to me. So this one is the city of Omaha, which is in Douglas County. So I got this data from the Douglas County Election Commissioner. So Omaha, and I think Lincoln, other cities in Nebraska have their city council and mayoral elections in odd numbered years. So 2001, 2005, 2009, 2013, 17, 21, etc. The next mayoral election in Omaha will be 2025. City council vote at the same time. You could go to the Douglas County Election Commission and see that there are actually a lot of offices and a lot of votes that occur in these odd numbered years. So what's the turnout for these kinds of elections? It's not great. So look at, for example, the highest year on there, which is 2017. In 2017, for the mayoral election in the city of Omaha, there were about 282,000, just over 282,000 registered voters. That's people eligible to vote in that election. Only 99,000, less than 100,000 voted, close to 100,000. But that's a voter turnout of 35.31%. The one before that, the highest one actually before that was in 2001, where 44% turned out to vote. But a lot of times we're electing a mayor and we're electing a city council in the city of Omaha with somewhere between 25 and 35% of the actual registered voters going to the poll to cast their ballot. So this is really interesting, because if we say that local politics is the place where we can do the most engagement, then it would seem that people would vote in higher numbers. So this is kind of my final slide, and this is the part where I think I start to ask the questions about public administration, which is what we're all doing here. What is the basic activity of citizen engagement? I mean, we talk about citizen engagement. We talk about having citizens on boards. We talk about going out and meeting citizens and involving them in various activities. But isn't voting the basic activity of citizen engagement? And if that's true, then why does it seem from the data that we vote in low percentages? Is there an ethical obligation to vote if you're a citizen? Should we make voting mandatory? It actually is in some democracies in the world. It's mandatory to vote. Should we make voter registration automatic? That is, when, for example, you get a driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote, or by some other mechanism where you're registered to vote, and if you don't want to vote, you'd actually have to opt out of voting. So those are all questions that have to do with voting. And again, the reason I present this is because I think it's an important facet of a representative democracy. And I just like to update this and get students thinking about it. So that's it. Thanks for your attention. And as always, I appreciate comments you might have on this subject.